One of the most common questions people ask in Photoshop is, how do I remove something or someone from a photograph, or how do I cut that object out? Well, you can't. I'm Dave Cross, and I'm here to show you that you can't remove something in Photoshop. You have to think of it differently, and that's by covering it up to make it look like it was never there. Think about it this way. If I have a photograph and I decide I don't want these trees in there anymore, I could cut them out. It's hard to cut upside down. But of course, when I do, now there's just a hole where that was. And Photoshop works very much the same way. If I take a photograph and cut out an area, it's just going to be the equivalent of a hole. So what we need to do is find other pixels that we can use to cover up the information we want to remove. And we can do that in several different ways. Ideally, Photoshop can do it for us in an automatic way, but sometimes that doesn't always work, so we need to have other plans in mind. So for example, here, if I decide I don't want this street number on here, I could make a selection and choose cut. But when I do, I just get a white square, and I'd have to then fill that in with the equivalent colors around here. So cutting something out in Photoshop doesn't work either. What we need to do is fill this with the right kind of pixels. Now, it's possible we can use a tool like the spot healing brush and just paint over the area that we want to fill, and then it looks at the surrounding pixels and fills those areas in. And that works great for situations like this where the surrounding area, first of all, there's lots of it, and second of all, it's just kind of random colors and patterns. Where it becomes more challenging is cases like this, where someone says, can we just take this person out? Well, that's easier said than done. First of all, let's try and see if we can use the automatic selection technology to make a selection. So we'll use the object finder to see if it can't just find that person. It's done an okay job. And if I make an initial selection, then I can try using a command like content aware fill. But before I do that, let's just take a look at the surrounding areas, because it's going to have to look like the spot healing brush did at areas nearby to try and cover him up to make it look like he was not there. And that's to say nothing of the fact that the selection has missed part of him. But let's just see what happens if we go to content aware fill. You can see that it looks at the surrounding areas and tries to cover up. Let's get a little closer and see what we've got here. And you can see some areas, like that line, looks pretty good, but first of all, that edge isn't great. So let's go in here and just make this selection just a little bit bigger. It doesn't have to be quite so accurate for this part. And you can see it's getting better, but then it starts to become more challenging because it's looking to say, what areas can I use to cover this up? So with a bit of effort, I could go in and say, don't use these other faces. I'm just painting away the areas that I don't want it to use, and that's making it better, but you can still see it's going to take an awful lot of effort. And we can keep fine-tuning and tweaking, but at some point when we're going to click OK, it's going to generate, if I deselect that, pressing Command or Control D, this is what it generated, these extra pixels. And it's a good start, but it's going to take an awful lot of work for us to cover it up. And that's really what I wanted to focus on here, is the fact that we're not just saying cut that person out, we're covering him up with other pixels, some of which we might copy ourselves manually by using tools like the clone stamp tool, others that will be generated using something like the spot healing brush, the healing brush, or the content aware fill, as we just saw. Now, sometimes it goes beyond that. It's just you have to look at it yourself and say, well, the automated work didn't do everything I need, so what else can I do to try and make this look realistic so it looks like this person wasn't there? So for example, in this case, let's get a little closer in. On top of the work I've already done, I could use the spot healing brush to try and take away some of the obvious repetition. And then try and get rid of some of these obvious edges. But for example here, there's work that needs to be done. I need to go to the clone stamp tool, for example, Option or Alt click on this line, and then try to repeat it. Make the brush a little bigger and get this other area. Repeat the light perhaps. You can see it's going to take an awful lot of time. And that's the other reality is when people say just remove them, well, this could take hours to get a result that looks realistic and doesn't have people looking at it thinking, something looks a little odd about that. So it's almost anything is possible in Photoshop, of course. We just have to be prepared for how long it might take us. Now I want to show you another example where we can take advantage of using some other pixels in the document, but doing it mostly manually. So in this example, this person here is kind of in the way, and I'd like to quote-unquote remove them, which of course we now know means cover them up. So one of the things that I will often suggest doing is take more than you need. So I just made a big selection. I'm going to press Command or Control J to duplicate that. Then press V for my move tool and drag it over. And we want to see if we can make this line up. So we're going to lower the opacity a little bit so we can see where it is and see if it's how well it's lining up. Of course, it's not going to line up perfectly. But what we want to look at in particular is the lower areas of the door, for example. So I'm going to press Command or Control T for free transform. Start to maybe rotate it. Might actually look better if we right click and choose flip horizontal. That might help line things up there. That looks pretty good. I'm going to hit enter and then put the opacity back to 100%. Now it doesn't look very realistic at this point, of course, so what we're going to do is add a layer mask, but we're going to add it filled with black. And we do that by holding down the Option or Alt key as you click on the Add Layer Mask button, and that's going to hide everything. So remember, I copied way more than I needed. All I really need is the areas to cover up our motorcyclist here. So I'm going to tap B for my brush. I've already got white as my foreground color. Make my brush a little bigger using the bracket keys. And now anywhere of this layer that I want to show to cover up my motorcyclist, I'm only going to paint in those areas. So as I go through here, you can see now I'm using a pretty big soft edge brush to start off for all this main work here. And it looks like I'm painting him away, but what I'm really doing is showing the layer that I put on top. And we might have to do a little bit of tweaking here and there, but you can see that's a pretty good start. So that's actually a really good strategy, is to take more pixel information than you need to help you line things up, add a layer mask, fill with black, and then paint with white just in the areas you need to make it work. So the good news is we have these great tools like Content Aware Fill that work a lot of the time, if nothing else, to give us a great start. But we also have to be prepared sometimes to manually add other areas, whether again it's healing brush, clone stamp tool, or in last example, actually manually copying pixels, flipping them over, repositioning them, and then masking them into place. So next time you're faced with looking at something and saying, oh, I need to cut that person out, what you really need to do is think about covering them up to make it look like they were never there.